Welcome to this event, which is called Northing On Air #2. And the reason that we are gathered here today is this anthology of poetry with poems from Bergen and from Shanghai. And hopefully you will be interested to read this anthology when one time comes. So you can just follow Northing on Facebook, I guess. The first thing that it's going to happen is that we're going to have listen to the Norwegian Consul General.
Hello everyone, I'm Christine Iglum, the Consul General at the Norwegian Consulate General in Shanghai. While the pandemic and the travel restrictions are still going on, the social distance between us human beings is fortunately not felt too broad as our communication over the digital world continues. It even has become the new fashion today that we set up meetings and exchange ideas online more frequently than before, just like we are doing here at this occasion. The charm of this is thanks to the languages that the human beings created centuries ago, which emerged in the early prehistory of man. With the use of languages, we communicate, we entertain, express identities, release emotions, etc. Today, it is estimated that the number of human languages in the world vary between 5,000 and 7,000, speaking for varieties of cultures around the globe. Norwegian and Chinese are two of these, very different from each other in terms of origins and histories, semantics and grammar, sounds and symbols. However, they share the same elements in terms of functionalities, productivities, and diversities. As a Norwegian living in China and having been learning Chinese for almost a decade, I cannot agree more on what people say, that language is key to culture. I am very excited to see what is going to happen here soon. An in-depth conversation between Norwegian and Chinese friends about languages, especially using poem, the figurative language to reveal cultures of two countries that are far away from each other. I cannot wait to hear the poetry recitals from Norwegian and Chinese poets. My best greetings to Mr. Wang Yin, who is right now joining this event from my residence in Shanghai, while I am still physically in Oslo, but will fly back to Shanghai very soon. I would like to give my sincere thanks to the Norwegian cultural organization Northing, who is the main organizer behind this event and has given a beautiful title to the event, Mountain Ocean Poetry for Bergen and Shanghai. The two cities, just like their languages, differ and resemble in many ways. My greetings also to Bergen Literature Festival and all participating poets and designers from Bergen and Shanghai. Thank you for the joint efforts in making this sharing event happening. I look forward to seeing more poetic exchanges between the two cities in the near future, maybe in a concrete space next time.
First things first, Ben. For those who don't know you, who are you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben. Me and my wife, Ile, who's sitting there, we started a cultural organization called Northing. We're working a lot on culture exchange projects between China and Norway, and hopefully reach out to other Eastern Asian countries too in future. We just opened a culture space right across the street of Literature House. We call it Northing Space. There's going to be exhibition events in the future. And at the same time, we are also running a publishing house. That's also the reason why we're here. And the name of the publishing house is Kinakaal Forlag. Those who know Norwegian, it means Chinese cabbage.
Can you tell me something about how this anthology, or the work with this anthology in particular, got started?
Yeah, actually, this is the idea of our friend here in Litteraturhuset and in Booksalongen, and the manager, Anna Vatne.
And I must also mention that Anne, she also co-edited the book with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just make an anthology with the Chinese and Norwegian. And later on, we narrow it down to with poets from Bergen and from Shanghai. So, and also we gave this this book the name Fjell Hav Poesi. Fjell, because Bergen is the city of 7 mountains, and Hav because of the name of Shanghai. Literally, Shanghai means above the ocean or above the sea. And there's 7 Norwegian or Bergensk poets and 7 poets from Shanghai. This cliche about 7 mountains and 7 seas, but it's nice to have the numbers, I guess. So with a great gratitude to all the poets who contributed with their poems in this book, and with especially for those poets in Bergen who helped me to achieve this like impossible mission to translate all those Chinese poems to Norwegian, because I cannot do this alone. Also, I'd like to thank Literature House and Text Alliance helping us with this event, which is going to be online.
For those in the audience, an applause to Ben, and then we're ready to greet the poets.
Yes, I leave the stage for the poets now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the poets that are joining me on stage is Cecilie Løveid, which is one of the leading figures in contemporary Norwegian poetry. Since her debut in 1969, she has continuously published poetry, fiction, and written for the stage. Her most recent poetry collection, Vandreutstillinger, won both the Brage Prize and the Norwegian Critics Award. Wang Ying is a Chinese poet, writer, photographer, and journalist, born in Shanghai in 1962. He lives and works in Shanghai. He is a columnist and staff writer for the Southern Weekly, one of the most famous newspapers in China, covering culture and arts, writing profiles and interviews. He has published several art books, and his selected poems have appeared in English translation, and 3 separate collections have been translated into French. In total, his work has been translated into more than 16 languages. Henning Bergsvåg is a key writer in the Bergen poetry scene, as well as having written 7 poetry collections, most recently the book Dette ikke et stille sted, which came out this year during the lockdown. He has also changed the live literature scene in Bergen, firstly by organizing the Bergen International Poetry Festival, and then later with his live event series Poesi, where in-depth conversations about poetry becomes part of the city's nightlife. Hu Yibao was born in Shanghai in 1985. She is a medievalist, poet, and literary translator. Her research focuses on Old and Middle English poetry and textual pictorial engagement in medieval manuscripts. As a bilingual writer, she has published 2 books of criticism, as well as 2 books of poetry. A Pagan Book of Horrors from 2012, and I Sit on the Edge of the Volcano from 2016, and is currently a member of the Shanghai Writers Association. Okay, welcome to the stage. And I want to start with you, Henning. I think you had some very interesting things to say about the differences between the Norwegian poems and the Chinese or Shanghai poems. Can you say something about that?
I found it a very, very interesting read. Of course, I haven't read it in depth, but I was a participant along with all the other Norwegian poets to cooperate with the translations from Chinese. So at least one of the poets I really got into the depths of. I would say that it is utterly, it's much more complex. These single poems. The Norwegian poetry now is a much more simpler thing. It's like these Chinese. I find them a little bit mysterious because they set up a premise in the start of the poem, and they create this little world that evolves during this poem. I would say much longer than usually the Norwegian poems, and it has a beginning and an end. It seems in opposed to the Norwegian poems, or at least what I'm writing, which is more a poetry book where there is no titles and it's all a part of one big movement, one big poem. So in here, and they also tend to do something that we don't do in Norway, which I found interesting, and it was I don't know what you call it in English, the in singular form, or the land of the deaf, or the speak of the blind, or
so they have like this willingness to use perhaps big metaphors or what's the vulgar perhaps, or something
too high. But it's I don't think it is meant as high at all. It means like a philosophical discovery. I can read one small one.
Yeah.
Fireworks. It's by the poet Shu Ru Sheng. Is that more or less correctly? Sorry. Fireworks. The beautiful fireworks can also be split in two. One half can blossom on the heaven of the deaf. The other half can make noise in the brains of the blind. So that's sort of. So I think in Norway we would ask, what blind? What do you mean? I mean, what particular are you talking about? So I think. But with one great exception, I would say, in Cecilia, who is much more, who does write these single poems, very strong single poems, and keep that tradition going.
Do you find it, as someone being accustomed to reading Norwegian poetry, do you find it difficult or strange or fascinating or inspiring to read? Or just frustrating when you face these single poems with this language that is unfamiliar, perhaps?
I would say incredibly fascinating, because it's not like I can say, okay, we did this 30 years ago, or we're past this, or it's a completely parallel situation. It's a tradition that has developed parallel to ours, and I've read too little Chinese, I have to say, after this. I'm really interested in it. We were talking about this, that Japanese poetry is much more known in America and also in Europe, and much more like to our traditions have followed each other more. So this is beautiful stuff, and strange, I have to say. Strange. It gives a lot of thoughts. I can read them again and again and again, and at least I will.
Yeah. I want to ask you a similar question to you, Mr. Wong. Having read the Norwegian poetry, what is your impression?
其实我看了这个书，我觉得非常惊奇。因为我们其实很少有机会能够看到挪威的诗歌，早一点可以看到这个 Rolf Jacobsen 和豪格的诗，那么这次我们是比较集中的看到了7位当代挪威诗人的诗，这个是这么大的这个量，我们是第一次看到， 然后看完之后，我就发现非常有意思的是，挪威诗人的诗，他们互相之间有很大的不同，但是他们放在一起跟中国诗人比较，就可以看出中国诗人和挪威诗人之间巨大的差异。这个差异其实是一个整体性的差异。那如果说没有这样一本诗集来集中的反映挪威诗人的创作，可能我们不会有这样的体会和感受。那么刚才和你讲到这个挪威的诗歌和日本的诗歌非常接近，我是很同意的，因为中国的当代诗歌其实它和中国的古典诗歌已经没有太大的关系了。我们更多的来源事实上是欧美的诗歌，是西方的诗歌，所以它的这个复杂程度比中国的古代诗歌和日本的诗歌要复杂得多，所以我们其实走的是完全不一样的两条路。那比如说包括他是在都柏林学的文学，所以他更多的来源是像爱尔兰、像英格兰这样的这个传统，甚至是中古神话的这些传统。那么这个其实跟中国的诗人也不一样。
I think I want to ask you, Cecilia, because when Wang and Bao were talking now, they have all these different schools of poetry that they say they read, the Chinese poetry and European. But my impression is that Norwegian poets mostly read other Norwegian poets. And you, as a teacher in creative writing, is that your impression as well, that Norwegian poets mainly read other Norwegian poets?
Oh, it's a difficult question to answer. They read each other, of course, in a generation.
Yeah.
That is natural, where you begin, where you come from, so to speak. You compare with others that you know personally.
Mm.
And you interchange tip, reading advice, what to read next, and so on. And normally, I mean, in the old days, the school was very central for teaching poetry. You had to go through a few main characters from the history of poetry too, as well as other literature. I'm not so sure how it is now in the normal schools. So I have a fear that we are losing contact with our history in a way, especially because we have changed the way of writing so much. No rhyming, no meters, so and so. And then we found the older folks very old-fashioned. So now it's singing lyrics that is rhyming, and and that is something else, we think. Me personally, I am a little bit. I feel that we are getting too little from abroad. And I read mostly what I can find in English and maybe Swedish and Danish. I love the Swedish poetry very much, as well as the Norwegian. But Norwegian poetry isn't my poetry these days. My personal poetry. My personal poetry goes with my generation, as I said in the beginning. And then I have widened it up, of course, but and I find a flower here and a flower there. But I don't feel I can embrace the big modern Norwegian poetry scene because it's impossible to follow each one.
Okay.
And yeah. And it's not from my heart that I read them. With a few exceptions, of course. Yeah.
Mainly me, of course.
You, of course.
It's a video with Teresa from Littfest Bergen, because this book was originally meant to be published at the International Literary Festival here in Bergen, but it was postponed. So she has sent us a greeting.
Jeg heter Teresa Grøtan, og jeg sjef for Bergen Internasjonale Litteraturfestival. Det har vært siden Litteraturhuset i Bergen bestemte seg for å starte en litteraturfestival i byen. Den har blitt arrangert 2 ganger nå. Andre gang var i februar 2020. Og det som så spennende med å jobbe med å utvikle den festivalen, at jeg får anledning til å kombinere mine hovedinteresser og det jeg har jobbet med hele yrkeslivet og egentlig vært engasjert i helt siden ungdommen, nemlig forholdet mellom litteratur og også andre kunstformer, og knytte det opp til samfunnet vårt i dag. Det som kjennetegner den vel at vi ikke en festival som bare presenterer de nyeste bøkene som har kommet ut på norske forlag, men som også tar utgangspunkt i andre sentrale problemstillinger, som for eksempel klima, ytringsfrihet, unges vilkår i dag, og nå naturlig nok også korona. Og så søker vi litteratur som kan speile noe om enkelte problemstillinger. Vi har hatt i underkant rundt 100 forfattere og andre på scenen de her 2 årene, og har hatt rundt 25 nasjoner representert. Så målet mitt å ha et bredest mulig geografisk og kulturelt mangfold på scenen. Vi har hatt forfattere fra Kina både første og andre år på programmet, og det ønsker vi å fortsette å ha. Festivalen, Bergen Internasjonale Litteraturfestival, vil være med på å jobbe for å påvirke at vi får en enda større bredde også i hva slags litteratur som oversettes til norsk. Og jeg håper nå etter hvert at vi får med litteratur og forfattere fra andre østasiatiske land. Når det gjelder digitalisering av litteraturfestivaler, så jeg litt delt i synet. Det gir jo veldig store muligheter både for å dra inn flere og andre forfattere på mange måter, og det gir også en stor mulighet til å spre festivalen til langt flere. Så det åpenbare fordeler med det. Samtidig så en del av det å være på festival, det å oppleve noe sammen, og å være i rommet, og å gå i bokhandelen, og å snakke med de du har vært på festival med etterpå, og kanskje få noen ord med favorittforfatteren din, og hele stemningen som ligger der, og ikke minst også det at du har en langt større utholdenhet når du kan flytte deg fra rom til rom og få ulike opplevelser servert, og det live. Så jeg tror at vi vil lære mye av situasjonen i dag og gjøre mer tilgjengelig på nett på den måten, men jeg tror aldri vi kan få til noe som kan erstatte det å være til stede på en festival. Til festivalen vår i 2021, og vi har et stort prosjekt der hvor målet å klare en form for kombinasjon av live og digitalt program, og hvor mulighetene for samarbeid og mulighetene for å hente inn forfattere fra steder vi kanskje ellers ikke hadde fått til. Men festivalen kommer til å finne sted på Litteraturhuset i Bergen 11. til 14. februar 2021, og der publikum velkommen til å være til stede, og så kommer vi til å planlegge sånn at vi kan skalere opp og skalere ned ettersom hvilke regler som vil gjelde, og følge de smittevernsreglene vi har å forholde oss til. Når det gjelder koronasituasjonen ellers generelt og vår festival, så har vi jo blitt påvirket i den forstand av at vi i lange perioder har fått flere oppgaver, både privat også, med å ta oss av familiene våre og barn, og dermed har hatt redusert kapasitet. Og vi har ikke kunnet være på kontoret så mye, og det også veldig utfordrende for å planlegge for festivalen videre. tror jeg at noen av de gode sidene ved det at vi veldig raskt har blitt tvunget til å sette oss mer inn I hvordan vi kan bli mer digitale. Så jeg håper jo at vi med det kan få med oss enda flere publikummere, også fra Kina, som kanskje kan oppdage oss gjennom det digitale, og kanskje senere kan komme selv på festivalen. Vi har jo som mål at vi skal være en festival som også tiltrekker oss et stort internasjonalt publikum.
Can you, Ms. Bao, say something about the road to becoming a poet in Shanghai?
Currently, I teach as an associate professor at the English department of Fudan University in Shanghai, which is a comprehensive university. But of course, like being a poet is always somehow mingled with being an academic for me. But that is not the common case because I personally I never believe I can make a living out of my poetry. So actually, since I was three years old, I never left the university. I did the BA and then an MA, and then I did a PhD in University College Dublin, and then I returned to Shanghai, my homeland, to teach at my alma mater and become an academic. But you can say that I am. What I'm trying to do is that I hope that I can find a framework. I can find a place where I can just have some leisure time to write my poetry. But ironically, I did find that what I suppose the leisure that I could find to writing when I become a professional academic, it didn't exist. Because to be a professional academic, especially we have this system called so-called tenure track system, which newly appointed lecturer has to become associate professor in 6 years, or you will lose your job. So actually, within that 6 years, I'm now in my 5th year. But in the very first 4 years, I spent 80% of my time writing academic papers and doing research. These are all I'm supposed to do. And I enjoy doing it, but I just didn't expect such pressure. I need to really publish or perish. I need to publish article after article. I need to keep being a very active academic. I need to attend all seminars, and I need to teach, and I need to do administrative works, and that really leaves very little time for my writing. And this is what now that I am past so-called tenure track time, I really hope that in the future I can have more time left for my writing, because this is what I expect to have the time to write. This is what is most important to me, and I didn't actually get in my early career as a academic in the university.
Well, I'm sorry if this is a silly question, but could either of you in Shanghai survive on the money from book sales alone?
No. Neither of us.
你可以。
Okay, 这样的 because the royalty in Shanghai in China actually of any creative writing, not just alone poetry, is actually very low. There is no way unless you won a Nobel Prize like Mr. Mo Yan. Otherwise, it is practically impossible to survive on your writing. Most poets they survive on from one grant to another. They float on the ocean of grants and fellowship. And as for Mr. Wang, 你要说说你的那个 he works as a journalist by profession, and I work as a professor at the university. And in a way, we all moonlight as poets. But we try. But But actually, poetry is the most important part, at least for me, like for and I think also for Mr. Wang. So what we moonlight as is what we hold at the highest importance. And although we don't make a living out of it, this is what we live for.
I would ask the same question to you. You don't? Could you, as a poet in Norway, survive on book sales alone?
Not book sales at all, but I survive on my poetry, I would say. But it also involves creative writing courses and the events that I'm making, scholarships, and so it all adds up to an income that I actually can live from, which I know is it's not completely unique either in Norway. But the fact that a person like me who sells maybe 300-400 copies of my newest book is living from this poetry is quite.
Which is also a bestseller.
Well, a bestseller.
A poetry bestseller, isn't it?
A poetry bestseller because it sold 300.
Yeah.
So yeah, but still, it's just a remarkable fact, and it's an incredible privilege that one should take really serious, and it has to do with a strong union, a writer union that has fought for these conditions. But if I meet my Swedish colleague and I can say that for my book I get 8,000 euros or 9,000 euros, even if it doesn't sell a copy, and my Swedish colleague says he only gets 400. It's a very unequal system. And I totally agree with Cecilia that the Swedes are better at poetry than us. So, or at least my interest also lies in the Swedish poetry. But I think it is a good thing, and I think it has the way Norwegian poetry has developed. I think because I don't share the view that Norwegian poetry is not where it's happening, because I think it is, but in a very hidden level. There's so many people writing poetry for this tiny bit little language. There are so many poets in Norway that is doing this actively, and people come together in different groups and stuff. And there's bound to be something important coming out of this project because it's so unique. So many people, so many events. In this tiny little language.
But wouldn't you say that poetry in Norway is also sort of a bubble where, yes, there is a lot of people writing it, but it is mainly for the people who search for or want to be a part of the poetry scene. So it's kind of closed off from the rest of the even from the rest of the reading audience, is my impression.
I think you're right that it's a closed circuit. It's young people read poetry and old people read poetry, but very few of them. But the people in between, they are busy with kids and the real life. But of course it is. But I think. But still, the poets have a certain status. I would say, when it's maybe a silly example, but when something happens, they ask poetry to do different stuff. If there's a big catastrophe or something, you suddenly see poets on the television making poems about it. But the fact is that there is not much catastrophes in Norway. There was one, but you immediately saw it that it was necessary to express this in a poetic form.
So it's like an emotional national reserve, just waiting for.
But now we're just experimenting. There's just experimenting all over the place, and it's very important. It's like what's the English word for grunnforskning? The science that you just do that is not specific to anything. It's just I think it's basic research. Something for the language itself. Sort of, it's not connecting too much with
But you don't.
with the events.
But you don't see that as a problem because when there is an event, then it will become.
Then they can see what we got.
Okay.
Wow, we're this good.
Mr. Wong, can you say something about the position of the poet in Shanghai Chinese society? What is expected of the poet, and what role does he play as?
诗人其实在上海是很小很小的一部分，因为知道上海是一个商业城市，它可能更像伦敦、像纽约这样的一个大城市，但是它又不像伦敦和纽约或者巴黎这样，它是一个多元的，它更多是一个扁平的城市。所以诗人在这里，他事实上是没有办法靠文学和诗歌来养活自己，所以他的地位其实相当是不是很高的，他还必须要做其他的工作。所以对我来讲，诗歌可能它更多是一个业余爱好，它不是能够影响到我的职业，能够影响到我对其他的一些看法，并没有。那我想可能你也是这样。
Is poetry expected to be political, or as Henning described, part of big national events? Is poetry expected to be a part of that?
那我想其实全世界都是一样的，每一个国家都有自己的作家和文学家去关心政治、关心世界的大事。我想不论是在挪威、在美国、在中国都是一样，但是不是所有的诗人都会去直接关注政治或者在诗歌里面表达出来，不是说所有的都会直接去，比如说去表达新冠肺炎，可能它对我们的影响是通过文学作品折射出来的，可能不是在今天，也可能是在明天，或者是10年以后，我把我心里面想说的话，这些事件对我的影响表达出来，它可能这时候表达出来才是更有力量。
This video is readings from the Bergen International Literature Festival with Queen Shanzhu and Wang Yi from China, and myself and Christian Hengenes from Norway.
En morgen kommer det snø ut av dusjhodet da jeg skal vaske av meg drømmene jeg har utsondret gjennom natten. I stedet for å smelte mot huden blir den til et tynt og lett klesplagg som gjør at jeg vil gli inn overalt. Selv om snøen dekker pungen, henger testiklene fortsatt fritt. I stedet for å krype inntil kroppen, som om jeg kunne gi dem noen som helst form for trygghet. Snødrakten gjør meg til et hvitt felt på et hvilket som helst kart. Ingen skal vitne om ansiktet mitt i gatene i dag. Ingen skal kjenne kulden fra snøhanskene mine når jeg stryker dem over skinnet.
不合时宜的人，你对我说，怀念那些缓慢的旧日子，同样缓慢的自行车和漏水的手表。我们都是不合时宜的人，端着不合时宜的咖啡，这一杯敬卡洛琳，这一杯敬贫穷，这一杯敬神经错乱的季节，这一杯敬无休无止的雪，敬过时的窃听器。 最后一杯敬我们自己，这些不合时宜的人。你该知道我多么乐意把你放在一个极其陌生的城市里，譬如耶路撒冷，譬如马拉喀什，譬如贝尔根，或者那些我们都念不出名字的城市，好让我在走神的时候，在背雨淋湿的街道上与你不期而遇。所以给你写信停笔的时候，就是一如既往的走神。我发送电子邮件的瞬间，就是永无止境的暴风雨终于停歇的时刻。
Hjernevæska, tanken på alle kroppene der ute som jeg ikke kjenner, og som ligger med andre kropper der ute som jeg ikke kjenner. Ingen nye kommer til å sette spor som de gamle. Frykten for at den aldri kommer så nær noen igjen. Hver eneste gang jeg husker noen, lages bildene på nytt i hjernevæska. Fortiden finnes ikke. Dette finnes. En fornemmelse av hans lukt og betydning. Øynene. Det vi har til felles troen på at vår ensomhet er den største. Om det bare var mulig å huske seg til en annen fortid. Selv om du savner han, betyr det ikke at du trenger han. Selv om du trenger han, betyr det ikke at du vil ha han. Selv om du vil ha han, betyr det ikke at det betyr noe.
潮汐篇。滑动的声音像打拳，舌根跃起之际，预警着涌浪冲刷你身体的边境。试探你秀色的海底磨亮自己，迎接久未挪动的肉。凭借权柄没收你的辎重。你看，海水替汗水把例外之物拒绝于域外。你忧虑于陷阱，也像潮汐舒展淡红色的入口。被拍击的欲望，被排挤。每一次往返，呼喊挤压着浪尖彼此追尾的听不见的震颤，像聋哑者的心友，你为亲密而禁言。喜悦的威力，以毫米推进在4分格精确的数学中。 1/4浪1/4傍晚。
I think that having listened to all of you, that poetry both in Norway and in China seems to be something that exists like on the edges of the discourse or the edges of society, and very often it seems to exist for its own sake, and then sometimes it becomes part of the general discourse or general society. One of those times was when in Norway was when you, Cecilia, wrote the poem "Straff." Can you tell us something about that poem and why you wrote it?
Yeah, poems are a personal thing. You don't write them because someone asks you to write a poem. You write poetry because you're interested in expression, the language, and what comes over you when you notice a little sentence here and there, and you feel alone in this. When this thing with the catastrophe happened 11 years. No, it's 9 years. 11 years ago. Is it?
It's 9 years.
9. Sorry. Yeah, I was not listening to the radio or didn't see television, and my daughter phoned me and said, Mama, oh. And then I was suddenly aware that the day was very beautiful. It was a beautiful day. And I knew I cannot write about this. It is too much. And happily, I wasn't asked to write any poem, because they asked the biggest hotshot poets, and I wasn't amongst them. And that I'm very, very happy, because I wouldn't be able to write anything original at that time. You need space. You need something more, in a way. Very, very strange to say when this big thing happened, but you need another angle, so to speak, that is your own angle. And if you don't find it, you won't write anything before you find it. So 8 years, I think it was after all the trial, all the judgmental things, all the rättssak. The court said this, and the court said that, and people said this and that, and then I suddenly was thinking, well, am I going around with a rose in my hand and like a cow with a rose in his mouth? No. I want to punish him. And I find it so ridiculous that you cannot come out with your, not hatred, but something similar to hatred, and kind of catastrophe inside of each Norwegian, in a way, and you cannot have a revenge. He is going to be taken care of for all his life, and have some nice dinners that he can heat up in an oven by himself. I don't know. So then I constructed a new punishment, straff, something that I wanted him to do. A fake punishment, a new made by me, and that was that was built on the pictures of him in this terrible uniform and in this police uniform and the gala uniform and all his roles came to me, and I was thinking, well, he can do this and he can do that. He can be followed around and say I'm sorry to everyone that has lost someone. He murdered that children, or he for life destroyed the life that was destroyed. And yes, I made a rule, and I made the rule should be that no one would say his name, and no one can film this I'm sorry procedure, but he has to go on forever because there's so many and so much to say sorry for.
What were you surprised by the attention that this poem got?
I had occasionally a reading for the students, Studentersamfunnet, the student society in Bergen, and someone from Aftenposten, the biggest Norwegian paper beside another one, Boulevard paper, the biggest serious paper, Aftenposten, was there, and he ran up to me and said, and he gave me his card and said, "Send it to me." And next day he had read it for the whole paper, all the workers in the paper, and then they published it. First on the first page, and then on the page so and so, and then a culture page, so big photo page, an interview page. It was really big. My poem was all over the paper. Yeah.
I think coming into this conversation, I didn't know much about the poetry scene in Shanghai, so I've learned while we were talking as well. And I, put simply, I expected there to be differences because it seems. Like the reason to do poetry seems quite similar. It is not to comment on society or not to be a part of a discussion or not to be widely read, it seems, but this is this drive for writing itself and for a language itself. And I know I want to ask you, Ms. Bao, when you became or decided to become a poet, can you say something personally? What was it that made you want to take that road, and how did like the environment, your family or your friends, or how did they react?
For me, like, to be honest, I don't quite remember there is an exact moment where I made something called a decision to become a poet, because it always came as part of as a child. I love, whenever in a mathematics class, I just doodle lines and stories on my textbook, and I spent all the unhappy hours of my teenager years just making poetry and writing stories to make myself feel life is livable. So actually, I never thought that I was a professional poet, or there is ever a decision to make. Like, as a person, I need to have a career, but that career I never thought myself as someone who has taken that path. But the fact is, I kept writing poetry to now. Maybe it's already 20 years, but it has become so natural as breathing and eating that really there's no interference from the outside, because I never one day I claimed to my parents that, okay, I'm going to denounce all my more respectable career choice and become a poet. They just because my parents they are quite open-minded, and because I'm very bad with mathematics from a very early age, and I barely passed when we have this like university entrance exam, I like scored almost full score on all the humanities subjects, but I barely passed the mathematics test. So they already feel lucky that I grow up as someone who can support myself. Then so they don't really they don't think being a poet is something that's very unnatural. They just leave me alone to do whatever I like to do, and I think that's quite the case with many young poets, at least because I'm born in the 1980s, this generation. Poets is more like you live the life of a poet, but as a hermit. You are not open in the stage, and you are not wearing a label like I am a poet on your head. It's more like a way of looking at the world, and it's more like a way, being a poet is more like a way of dealing with the world and dealing with all your relationship with the world. And it's something that we don't really talk about a lot. Like when we introduce ourselves, we would never say that I am a poet, though it might be, I don't know if it's the case in Norway. At least that might come a bit strange in a city like Shanghai. But we have this kind of secret communal identity that we would recognize those who write poetry and those who truly love making poetry as the goal of their life. And we would form these little so-called friends where it's just these messages just passed silently amongst us.
The video that we're going to see now is readings from poets who are in the anthology, but who are not here with us today.
失眠者与女儿。失眠者躺在女儿旁边，在黑暗里听着她轻轻的鼾声。失眠者感觉不到自己的耳朵，除非让意念跳到眉毛下面，再下面，他也感觉不到眼睛和嘴唇。失眠者看着这熟睡的小脸，多少未知的烦恼要来修改这漂亮的嘴唇、眼睛和眉毛，多少无法驱改的意念要来干扰这样纯粹的睡眠。
Når diktet står alene, minner det om et urgammelt maskineri som kverner på historien og ordene. En perforert presenning, små rifter, som luft og lukter siver ut av. Vi vet ikke sikkert hva som befinner seg under. Formen minner om en sky, men hva minner skyen om?
抒情。陶浦河的宽度并非一目了然，在浑浊的水中，我想要看见仇恨栖身于何处，有着何种阴影。捕鱼人的咒骂那么清澈，仿佛是另一个人的。那几颗梧桐落满了灰尘，我看见。黑鱼、陶浦西路、武威东路都很遥远，我看见，不，我听见。寒音变得稀薄，树枝上的霜迅速消失。那个煤气站被拆了，阴霾中渗透出阳光。我想听见一个人走过。
Uten briller er blikket uskarpt. Fjellsiden er tåkete, hustakene flyter i hverandre. Byen føles mer virkelig når jeg ser på denne måten. Det er unaturlig å kunne se langt. Hvorfor bruker du ikke briller oftere, sier han, du myser alltid. Er det viktig at jeg gjør et forsøk, prøver å se verden utstrakt? Han står halvveis oppe i gardintrappen, leter etter lekkasjer rundt vinduet. Metallet fortsetter under beina hans som forlenget kropp. Jeg holder stigen. Føttene hans på høyde med mine skuldre, og han sier, jeg skjønner ikke hvor alt dette vannet kommer fra. Blikket uten briller reflekterer hjernen. Den konsentrerer seg også om det nære, om den tørre huden rundt neglene, om smulene.
十字架与槐花定得再深些，再深一寸就可以重生了。这些从十字架上拔出来的铁钉已经有了新光芒。上帝是黑暗的，他是在所有光芒用完一生后注入体内的突然黑暗。槐花如烈焰，照亮万物那极度的苍白色。
Henning, I want to ask you, it seems perhaps that you have a vision that taking poetry into the nightlife will extend the readership of poetry. Is that the mission?
Not really, but I find it really important to create this place, this haven for people to come to, that write poetry themselves. I mean, all the young people that are as you described, this secret community of all these people sitting alone with their own writing, and have this one event where you can meet the others, basically. And so it's a very social. I try to make a social place for this community.
Where you can have the label that she talked about, the poet label. And wear it proudly.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a poet and I'm proud of it. Yes. Yeah, but I think that it is as you said, it's enthusiastic, but it also dead serious. The conversations on stage is really going to the core. It's in depth. There's not any distance, like humoristic distance, when it comes to taking the poetry dead serious. So it's more the atmosphere afterwards. I mean, you make a party out of it. So yeah. But I was just going to comment, if it's okay, on the role of the poet, and I think for me it was definitely like a desperate need for identity. So I just took it full on from when I was in my early 20s. I had difficulties with connecting to myself, but when I discovered books very late in the early 20s, I started reading. Then I found this new world where I could create a new identity within the words, and then I put on the hat. And I just made this persona, and I found it the perfect hiding place for my. So I make a lot of fun a little bit about playing the role of the poet, but I find it the perfect hiding place for doing some serious poetic work underneath that facade.
I wanted to give an example of an evening with Poesi Dig, because you hide with placing yourself in the middle of a group of friends, and you start with setting the light that is cozy red like a bordello, like an evening on the opera or something. And then you fill old-fashioned chairs with literature people, and they are all thinking that they are coming to a party. And then you start with, for instance, students from the academy. They can train there. It's their playing ground, so to speak. And they cannot read. They are not good at performing or anything, but that's okay. And then the mic is maybe not the best. Yeah, the sound is not very. And it's a kind of terrible, but then you realize, wow, here is my favorite poet coming from Sweden, coming from Mexico, coming from here and there, and my colleagues again and again. Again and again, you do this fascinating mixture of kind of little, like a cartoonish style, and dead serious. That is very fascinating. Yeah.
I think the last question, I think we'll go to you, Mr. Wong. Can you explain to me now, describe for me the events that you do in Shanghai, and what do you want to achieve with the events that you organize in Shanghai?
其实我们今天下午刚刚做了一期这个诗歌来到美术馆的活动，就 Poetry Come to the Museum， 已经是第8年了，然后已经是第65期了，非常非常的高兴，因为大家知道，因为这个疫情的关系，我们停了整整半年时间。今年其实我们邀请了7个国家的诗人，1个都来不了。希望明年情况好一点，能够过来。那么我们这个活动到现在呢，已经邀请了差不多30个国家的诗人，来到上海，在美术馆用母语读他的诗歌，跟上海的观众分享他的创作经验，他的生活。从我自己来讲，我做这个活动，我觉得我自己受益很多，因为我可以看到各种各样的诗人，他们的生活状态，他们的写作状态，他们是怎么样去创作一首诗的。这个其实不论是从精神上的鼓励，互相鼓励，包括这个写作技巧上的拓展，我觉得都是有很大的好处的。那我们明年也会请 Frederick 来上海参加我们的活动。之前我们请过这个Vorod 是4年前来上海，那么明年会有第2位挪威的诗人来到上海。那我希望有更多的北欧的诗人、挪威的诗人带着他们创作的诗歌出现在上海的观众面前，把他们的作品翻译成中文，那就像我们现在看到的上海诗一样。
Thank you. I want to say in the end, I think it's interesting to see that poetry as this form of text which exists simply for itself, that is so similar that in Norway and in China. I was quite surprised by that, and I think that's very interesting. And I hope that people who have listened today will want to read poetry from the country that you're not from, but also generally to read poetry from different places all over the world. The anthology, can you hold it up? It looks like this. It will be for sale sometime or another. It's quite beautiful. And of course, inside you can read poetry from all the poets that have been on stage today. And the poem that we were talking about with Silje Straff is also in there. This last video is from the designers who made the book.
书名叫做《山海诗》，这里的山是指挪威的贝尔根，海指的是中国的上海。在这整件作品的设计的概念上，我觉得是做到了直截了当、深入浅出。其实这么多年实践，我是越来越注重作品表达的深入浅出。我总是在想，读者怎么样才能理解我们设置的这样或那样的一些想法，达到一种平等的沟通。所以在这整本书的设计上，我一直想传达给读者是这样的一种感受。山海诗这本诗歌集是上海和挪威贝尔根2个城市文化交流出版的一本诗歌集。他们邀请了7位贝尔根著名的诗人和7位上海著名的诗人进行诗歌的交流与碰撞。每一位诗人呢，就选出了 各自具有代表性的5首诗，总共加起来一共是70首诗歌进行集结出版。然后根据他们城市的这个特性跟气质，把诗歌的名字取名为山海诗。书籍的整体的设计概念就根据这个内容来展开，所以大家可以看到上半部分是绿色，代表了山植物的感受，下半部分蓝色代表了水，中间的这一个交界线就好像地平线一般。整本书的文字的部分印刷都用了专色印刷，用了3个专色，然后让整体书籍阅读的体验变得非常的纯粹和干净。大家可以看到这本书天头的毛边的这样处理，好像雪花一般，像羽毛一样，让这本诗歌有了一种阅读的一种轻盈的感受。当然在纸张的选择上，在工艺的选择上也非常的考究，我们选用了一款非常轻柔的棉纸，所以这本书拿在手上的阅读体验是非常的轻盈的，非常的柔软。所以阅读体验也是在我做书籍作品里面我一直想强调，或者我一直想表达给读者的一种感受。
Fotografiet utydelig. Bølget av sollys på kjøkkenbordet. De 2 figurene, en kvinne og en mann, nedsunket i en dyp sofa, et svagt lys bak der. I det mørke, i det bitende kalde, i stillheten så ulik andre stillheter, langt inne i dette bildet konturene av et tredje ansikt. En skikkelse, gjennomsiktig, dobbelt eksponert. Definitivt et tredje ansikt i fotografiet. Det en mann der ved klesskapet bakerst i bildet, ved den hvite skjorten på dørhåndtaket som skinner svagt i lysskjæret fra bordlampen. Du kunne skrive ting som «Det finnes ingen mennesker i et fotografi». Det finnes ingen i huset. Det finnes ingen mennesker i en bok. Det ingen her. «
岛屿生活，这是冰川时代遗留的巨型圆丘，这是淡金色山谷拥带的灰蓝峡湾，这是圣灰树正顶峰炫耀逝者缤纷的许愿节，这是一场久远饥荒后废弃的牧场。从一座岛到另一座，选择永远是假象。从一片海到另一片，维京人心知肚明。所以续长须，削龙骨，从容劈开雪宗怒浪。你得好斗又贫瘠，像节节败退的泡沫高墙，才会管那叫征服。岛民们从不这么想。他们熟知那白云，日日出没于西山，执着于崖畔，它不会改变形态，投身湖海。他们眼中长草，细看礁石坡绵延，暗存先祖们，也许来自俄摩拉。死去国王的宝座列队，引入浓雾与骤雨，那峭壁上独坐的老人，还吹响永不变奏的风笛。从一座岛到另一座，从无针受孕的番石榴到化身绵羊的山蔷薇，奇迹是众岛的特产。从观看一幅画到成为画，成为颜料、天青石、山脉，成为布纤维和透视法，你所愿意知道的一切，岛屿都乐意吐露，但别指望真相。Thank you.
Straff. Jeg glad han fikk straffen han fikk. Som kjent skal han leies frem til hver eneste grav. Han skal legge en kurv med fortid og en kurv med fremtid på graven. Han skal ha på seg gallauniform. Han skal i tillegg tømme oppvaskmaskinen til alle foreldrene, gjøre sønners og døtres plikter. Gå på fotball, gå på trening, synge i korene. Han får det travelt. Han skal spille inn en godnattsang til hver eneste en. Der hvor taket falt ned på regjeringsskrivebordet i Y-blokken skal han stå naken og ensom med kroppen dekket av velduftende babypudder. Han skal stå alene. En hvit skjerm skal trekkes foran ham. Som kjent er han dømt til å se hver enkelt i øynene. Og som kjent er det ingen som vil se ham i øynene. Det bunnløse reservoaret av selvforsvar skal vendes. Plutselige, modige, uventede spørsmål skal legge ham åpen. Han skal ikke få endre navnet sitt. For hvor han enn kommer, vil noen si navnet hans. Noen vil si navnet hans, og han vil snu seg. Han vil bli den kjente botsgjenger. Han skal utføre oppgaven alene, uten bruk av nett, manifest, dukker, stand-in eller dobbeltgjengere. I dommens premisser ligger også at ingen av disse botsøvelsene må fotograferes, skisses, kartuneres eller filmes. Ingen lydopptak må finne sted, bare ordet unnskyld kan tas opp. Man kan ikke gå tilbake og endre på noe som er følt. Derfor, og selv om man gjør alt dette, blir det stille.
白色的海洋，白色的海洋穿过黎明的医院，玻璃的余温，裸露的玻璃上有余温。我躺在潮湿的人行道上，水泥地面像玻璃一样冰冷。城市在我的脊柱之下，无声无息地运行。在悲伤的底层，不是夜晚，又能是什么？我的沉睡换作沉睡，我的哭泣是所有的哭泣，抒情的润滑剂打开谎言的盖子。宇宙这样一宿，青春无可怀疑。白色的海洋穿过黎明的医院，轻盈的钢铁叙述着锈蚀已久的夏天。
So the last thing to do is just to give an applause to Cecilia, Henning, Mr. Wang, and Miss Bao.
Thank you.
Tusen takk.